everything that will be done will be by Australians, for it is Australians that stand for the policy of advancing Australia.
Hi, perhaps you recognize me. It's your favorite president.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
And if the yes vote is successful, we will be divided forever.
What does confrontation mean? It means you fight for what you believe.
We've got Trump-mania running this country, brother.
Unless you're scripted, you're useless.
I was saved by God to make America great again.
We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is watching this episode and your continued support for this channel. Now, if you would like to comment or call in, you need to be listening to us live on Facebook, Rumble, or YouTube. If you are doing that, feel free to comment. We want to hear from you. And if you want to call in and have your say, also hit that StreamYard link in the chat. Now, to support us, and there's an election coming up. Albo's finally called the election, so we've got a number of events that we're going to be organizing and trying to do some exciting stuff leading up to the election. So the more funds that we can get through from you guys, the more that we can do, and that's by heading to commandingthenarrative.com. Hit the donate button. You'll come to this page if you want to donate to us directly, or you could also go on Buy Me a Coffee. And Albo's talking about his tax cuts, how you can save $5 a week. If you want to donate that to us, it'd be much appreciated. You can do that through Buy Me a Coffee. And while you're there, go to the main page of Commanding the Narrative, and you'll get all our most recent podcasts. Hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner. You've got a weekly newsletter from me with all those podcasts, any articles that I might write, and also all the upcoming events that I just mentioned. Now, obviously, if you want to know what's coming up on the podcast this week, you'll find it on the main page. But this Wednesday night in Balgowlah, we've got Senator Matt Canavan speaking, also Jared Holland of the Page Research Centre, Zoe Hilton of the Centre for Independent Studies, and also Mr. Paul Vallejo, which you should all know Paul from this podcast. They're all going to be speaking at the Securing Our Energy Future Symposium. It's at the Balgowlah Bowling Club, as I said, Wednesday, April 2nd at 7 p.m. Head to commandingthenarrative.com to get your tickets. Also coming up, just announced, is a community forum down in Whitlam. I'm going to be hosting this one on behalf of Commanding the Narrative. Whitlam's going to be a very, very interesting seat down near the Illawarra. So if you're nearby and you want to come along, it's free. It's on Monday, April 14th at 6 p.m. at the Albion Park Bowling Club. So that's going to be very, very interesting indeed. If you want to keep up to date with all of that, head to commandingthenarrative.com. Where you should also head to, and this is going to be a little bit applicable to tonight's conversation, is Australians for Better Government. Head there. We're getting members sign up all the time, so please head to Australians for Better Government. We can't rely on politicians anymore to drive change in this country. We need a grassroots people's movement to drive change, and that's what Australians for Better Government is all about. Sign up to be a member. The more members that we get, the stronger we'll be, and if you can donate as well, that will be incredibly important and powerful, because it just gives us more ammo in our kit to be able to put pressure on some of these politicians. And if you want to come along to this event, the Australians for Better Government Gala fundraiser. Now, this is after the election, so this can be a post-election celebration if you want to think about it that way. It's on Sunday, May 25th at noon at the Warships Club in Warrawee. We've got John Ruddick from the Libertarian Party. He'll be speaking. Also, Darren DeBortley from DeBortley Wines. That's going to be very, very interesting to hear someone outside of politics, someone that's built their own business, a family business. It'd be interesting to hear from him and his perspective. And also the great Kevin Loughrey will be speaking as well, and we'll be announcing more speakers as we go along. But speaking of Mr. Kevin Loughrey, tonight we're going to be talking about the Australian Defence Force. Now, this is something that I haven't spoken to Kevin about before, and this is going to be very interesting. And also also Alistair Pope, who we've had on the show before. It's been quite some time since we had Alistair on. Very interesting man. Both of these men are former lieutenant colonels in the Australian Defence Force. So it's going to be very, very interesting to hear them speak and hear their perspectives on whether Australia can defend itself going forward. So let's bring them on. Alistair and Kevin, welcome to Commanding the Narrative.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, Alistair. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Very clearly.
Very good.
Too loud or turn it down a bit?
That's perfect.
We can hear you loud and clear. So right. I've had both of you on in the past. It's probably even better that I've got you both on at the same time because you've both got tremendous military experience in the Australian Defence Force and also overseas as well. I might start off with you, Kevin. Recently, we saw these Chinese warships circumnavigate Australia and also have a live firing exercise where they didn't notify us. And then we had our Prime Minister go on television and almost make excuses for them, saying that they did notify us and blah, blah, blah. How do you feel about this? Do you feel secure in this country at the moment with stuff like that going on? And why do you think the Chinese didn't notify us?
Look, we're a country of 26 million. And in fact, Alistair and I are simpatico in a whole lot of ways. I'm more an ethereal sort of thinker in that I'm up at the high level strategy, or you could say stratosphere. And Alistair is a far more practical exponent of the art. He's extremely knowledgeable about past campaigns and history and also material solutions. He's written a very interesting treatise on this. I just say that as an intro. I will answer your question. And China has for quite some time caused me a great deal of unease. My brother actually graduated from Beijing University and he's lived up there, or he did live up there for around 25 years. He was a prominent engineer working on, world type things like Building 101 and the maglev train and so forth. He married a Chinese national. He did speak Mandarin and wrote it very well. So I used to go and visit him regularly, and he, in fact, helped me travel around China, visiting every manufacturer of motherboards and power meters, electricity meters, because I just filed patents for a new type of memory, non-volatile memory. And I won't take you there, but it actually does have some bearing on what we're talking about tonight, in that the type of memory that I had the license, or I had a patent for, is highly resistant to EMP. That's if someone explodes a nuclear bomb, you get this electromagnetic pulse, and it will wipe out all of your electronics, typical or the sort of electronics you have in your computer. So it would make a lot of sense to use the sort of memory that I was developing at that stage in military materiel. Anyway, enough of that. To answer your question, yes, look, it's extremely worrying. There is no doubt that China is, in my opinion, an existential threat to the security of Australia. We'll go into that later, and I'm sure Alistair will have a lot to say about that. And our Defence Force is in a pretty pathetic state for a whole range of reasons, which I'm sure also Alistair will touch upon during this podcast.
We'll bring you into this, Alistair. When you heard about this Chinese warships, or the three of the Chinese warships off the coast of Sydney having a live fire exercise and then circumnavigating Australia, what was your initial reaction? You're just on mute there, Alistair.
Because any international laws, they broke lots of ethical and moral laws and diplomatic conventions, but they didn't do anything illegal in what they were actually doing. And we sail around, we've had ships go up through the South China Sea, very close to the area there. In fact, we go into an area where they actually claim it's theirs, which it isn't, but international court said it's not. But So when they actually did this, it's just they're just actually poking the bear. They wanted to see what we would do about it and what we would say about it. Now, I didn't have any reaction to what they were actually doing. I mean, circumnavigating Australia, that's been done before. But in this particular case, it was our reaction that actually got me upset. When we had the Admiral who came on, and I watched the video of his testimony, when he was asked, when did you first find out they were there? And this was by Senator Patterson. And he said, oh, we detected them when they were coming around the eastern end of Papua New Guinea and the Solomons. And yes, and what happened then? He said, did you have ships go out and follow them, or as they do with us? And I said, oh, no, we didn't do that. And did we send any planes? At that stage? And then we liaised with the New Zealanders, because this was actually an allied thing, because they were coming down through the Tasman Sea. And then and Patterson said, did we keep track of them sort of 24 hours a day? Oh, no, we didn't do anything like that. You realize the cost of fuel. So anyway, at one point there, he said, yes, we passed it over to the New Zealanders, but they didn't do anything. We didn't actually know where they were for about 8 to 12 hours. So they're chuffing along at 21 knots, which means about 260 miles. What's that? 300 kilometers, and we had no idea where they were. And then he said, so Patterson was now sort of flummoxed. I mean, it was obviously, what do I ask him next? And he said, well, is it true that we first heard of this from a Virgin pilot who received a call over an open line saying we're going to have a live fire accident in an hour? And he said, oh, no. Yeah, we did in fact know they were there. We did know they were going to have a live fire exercise, and it's just that you've got to take into account our procedures. We were notified of it several hours before, and that was being passed up the line. And within only 2.5 hours, which, by the way, they'd already started live firing, we were ready to tell the minister that they were going to have a live fire exercise. So you can see Patterson pick himself off the floor and get the smelling salts. I would have been pouring about a double whiskey at that stage, but never mind. And he said, well, you mean we lost track of them? Oh, yes, that was the New Zealanders. They decided not to send out anyone in. So Patterson then made a fatal tactical error. He said, did we have any submarines following them, any tracking them? He said, no. Firstly, we only get one submarine at sea. And secondly, it does 9 knots underwater. And this thing's chuffing along at 21 knots. So we would be waving by to it as it went over the horizon unless we got to the surface and tried to ram it or something. So no, we didn't have any submarines. No, we didn't put any frigates out to find them. The Americans were telling us by satellite where it actually was most of the time, but not always, because they don't have, in this area, they don't have full-time 24/7 coverage. And so these ships would disappear and then reappear again when they were picked up again. Did we send out the Poseidons? Oh, yes, we did. We actually spotted them when they were 350 miles off the coast of Sydney. But at least they weren't going to do a right turn and come through Sydney Harbour. That would have been annoying.
Well, what if that had happened? What would have stopped them? Would we be able to stop them just strolling into Sydney Harbour?
No. We would probably have charged them a fee, and maybe had an open day and used them for ferries or something. But no, we didn't have it. We didn't take any action as if there were any threat whatsoever, which they weren't really. I mean, they had no intention of actually going around and sinking a few fishing boats or whatever else. They do that to the Vietnamese every now and again, just to annoy them, but they weren't going to do that to us. They were just there to actually show the flag and see what we would do. Now they know. We do nothing, and we don't have the capability of doing anything.
We've got someone who's called in. I'm not sure if he realizes he's called in, but let's bring him on. Are you there, Bob?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Yeah. You've called into the actual show. Did you have a question or a statement that you wanted to add?
Not at this stage. I'm just fascinated by the extraordinary state of our military preparedness or unpreparedness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the best way to listen to us is on YouTube or Rumble, or you can also listen to us on Facebook as well. This is the actual show, so we do allow callers to come on and call in. But if you want to listen to us, please head to YouTube or Rumble. That's probably the best way.
I apologize.
Okay, no, all good.
No,
all good.
if I can just jump in there, Bob is a real soldier. He has done terrific work when it comes to things like COVID and so forth. And Bob, it's lovely to see you. And I hope you get a chance to make comments and so forth in this podcast.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank
you. It's a pleasure. It's lovely to see you.
All right, we'll let you go.
If we could just go back to the ships, it is my belief, having studied submarine warfare at one stage, it would not surprise me that they were using their sonar to a large degree to actually confirm maps of the topography in the ocean. That you see, one of the problems you face with a submarine, especially if you're going at any speed, is you run the risk of running into something besides the odd whale. And if you run into a mountain range under the sea, the results are not good for the submarine or for the crew. And as a consequence, as you're circumnavigating Australia or doing whatever you're doing, you're running your sonar, your ASDEC at full rate to absolutely confirm the terrain, because one day you may want to send a nuclear submarine along there. It wouldn't surprise me also when warships like that do deploy, it would be a good exercise, as far if I was in charge of the Chinese Navy, to actually have it being shadowed by subs, because that's good. That is actually what they do. I mean, that is one of the purposes of submarines, and that is to protect surface fleet. Nowadays, by the way, submarines have been greatly degraded. Oh, and by the way, the CSIRO has very obligingly cooperated with the Chinese company to make the water basically transparent down to a depth of about, I think it's 500 meters, isn't it, Alistair? In other words, they've made it extremely difficult for a sub to hide in the water. That's our CSIRO helping the Chinese Communist Party.
But actually, Kevin, it was University of New South Wales. The CSIRO may have been involved too, but the University of New South Wales got the contract from the Chinese. And when ASIO sort of pointed out to them this was probably not a good thing, and maybe they shouldn't take this money, they said they could see no military applications for the technology which they were providing to the Chinese.
Look, Kevin, from a political perspective, what should we have done? What should have Albanese done, or Richard Marles as the defense minister, or the chiefs of the defense force? What should we have done after this exercise that the Chinese, if they were just testing us to see what our reaction would be, what should our reaction have been?
Look, as I said at the very beginning, I'm really at the top level of strategy. So one of the things I would be doing right at this moment is developing a missile shield. Because if they had ever wanted to, we have 5 capital cities, all of which can be destroyed. And if they're at 350 miles off your coast, your chance of interdicting that are virtually zero. So if you want to be serious about defense, the very first thing you have to stop are intercontinental ballistic missiles coming into your space. The next thing is that, as Alistair has adroitly pointed out, we should have the capability to monitor their movements 100% of the time. And there should be redundancy in this in case one of your methods of tracking them falls away, like if you're dependent upon the New Zealanders. So this is a shambles. It really is a shambles. And we've got to do something about it.
Well, let me just point out, I do read the sort of things that... Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask you a question, Alistair. I guess to set the table, is Australia a target for invasion? Like, we're obviously worried about the Chinese and we're concerned about the Chinese, but is is it feasible, or is it outside the realms of possibility that we could ever be invaded or be a target for invasion?
No, it's not outside the levels of possibility, but it's unlikely because you've got to come through some other countries first. Now, the Japanese were very rapid in expanding, and basically they actually looked at to take over an area the size of Australia. They estimate they would need 13 divisions, and they didn't have them to spare because they were fighting their major war was actually fought in China right throughout the Pacific War. Their land. We're faced with the same thing here, that how do they get here? And so the whole strategy has to be stop them from getting here. They've got the largest navy in the world now. They're building amphibious landing craft. But if we can stop them before they come through things like the Lombok Strait or around the east of Papua New Guinea and down through the Solomons, then you don't need an army as such if you can actually stop them from ever getting ashore. Now, what would they want in Australia? They want our coal mines. They want our iron mines. They don't actually want the city. I mean, they've got enough coffee houses in Shanghai as it is. They don't need any more. And that's about the only thing Sydney's good for. We don't have any manufacturing that they want. We don't have any technology that they need, but they do need our iron and steel. Now, if you remember, the Japanese had a big problem with oil. And when the Americans cut off their oil, they decided to bomb Pearl Harbor and go and grab all the oil fields they could, right down as far as Burma, Indonesia, all of these sort of places, and Sumatra. It didn't do them much good because, of course, they never got a decent convoy system in place. And so most of their oil tankers were being sunk before they ever got back to Japan with the oil. But that's another story. Are we under threat? Possibly not. We're at the low end of the scale. They've got too many other issues, such as Taiwan, which is going to be a major bun fight, that they won't be looking at that. But what they would like to do is isolate and keep Australia far away and out of the picture. And they can certainly do that. Now, we've just bought some missiles. I was looking this up, actually, because I read all these sort of releases that come out. We've just actually spent a couple of $2 billion on buying missiles. The first one is a beauty. It's a land-based missile with a range of 70 kilometers. Now, HIMARS has got a range greater than that. So why are we buying a missile with a range of 70? It means if I fire one from my backyard, I can basically hit my brother's place at the other end of Melbourne. That's about it. He's 70 kilometers away from me. So if I get it right, I could take out my brother. Yeah, good idea. Anyway, so that's one thing there. And then we've just bought another one, which can be air-launched with a range of 600 kilometers and sea-launched or land-launched. It's got a range of 470 kilometers. Now, where are you going to put them? 470 kilometers. I mean, I said you're looking at choke points like the Malacca Straits, Lombok Straits, around the east end of there, or maybe coming through the Barrier Reef and through the heads. Now, I had to look at the numbers, actually. They're not buying too many of them, so we can't defend everything. So where are we going to defend? We haven't got enough of those to sort of stage them all in the north of Australia and say, well, we'll stop anyone that comes through Lombok. Which is one of the main choke points, or try to go across through Thursday Island or somewhere like that. So yeah, I mean, we've got great geography, which means we're a very low possibility for invasion unless everyone else north of us has been taken out and invaded first. And then, of course, they've still got serious logistic problems in getting people here. They've got other priorities.
That's a big question strategically, Kevin. If to put you in the other position, if you were looking to invade Australia, would you come in from the north? How do you deal with the supply chain issues? Because it's such a vast country that our capital cities are so spread out. Centers of manufacturing. Well, we don't have any centers of manufacturing, but our mines are kind of spread out everywhere. If they want to get to those, and look, China owns a lot of them anyway, so I don't even know why they need to come in. But if you were in the Chinese Communist Party and or another country, Russia or India or I don't know, Indonesia or somewhere, and you're thinking about invading Australia, tactically, how would you look at doing it?
Well, there's a couple of points here. Looking into the future, one really can't predict with any accuracy where anything is going, except for the fact that China is on a trajectory where it will eventually be the unequivocal supreme power of the world. And when a nation gets to that stage, most other nations decide that they're not going to try and compete, certainly in a kinetic conflict. Australia's 15 million square kilometres, and Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth hold 78% of this nation's population and what remains of its extremely denuded manufacturing capability. So in the extreme, let's go 100 years from now, I drop X number of nuclear weapons and I completely removed those capital cities from the face of Australia. When you talk about me invading now, I don't have a problem. I can stroll in anywhere where it's not radioactive. I've come to the conclusion that there's no point in me having a Sydney, Brisbane, whatever. What I'm after is the something like $55 trillion of raw materials that exist in this country, and they're not in the capital cities. I'm after Lebensraum as well, to use the German term. And I don't care of the fact that I'm going to wipe out a measly 27 million Australians, because in the past I've wiped out 100 million Chinese. And so it's really, 27 million is small change, and they're doing a good job on the Uyghurs as well. And they did a good job on the Tibetans. Now, would the countries to our north interfere? Well, not if they're sensible, they wouldn't. And they've got nothing that the Chinese want compared to what they would like out of Australia. What would the Indians do? Well, I don't know. I would like to think that over the next 100 years, we become very good friends with the Indians. And they might think, look, if they did that to Australia, they could do it to us. But really, they couldn't do it to India because it's got 1.4 billion people and they're spread throughout the whole of their country. But Australia is a very interesting study because we have, and that, when we get into this, I'm talking about strategy. We have allowed ourselves to be concentrated in the city, despite the fact that in 1917, near the end of the First World War, and it wasn't seen to be the end of the World War in 1917, I have to tell you, things were not going well. We had a policy here in Australia of dispersal so that we would not offer a target to an enemy. Also, there was the mantra that if you don't occupy it, you don't own it. And yet, despite that, over the next, 120 years, we've done exactly the opposite. And on top of that, we've denuded our manufacturing capability, and all we really are is a mine and a source of primary produce. And by the way, the primary produce wouldn't be in the least bit affected if we were to wipe out Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And they most probably, the Chinese, being as industrious as they are, in about 2 years, they would have affected the Bradfield scheme, which a whole lot of feckless politicians have done nothing about for the last 50 years. You might gather I'm at the point of despair to tears with how chronically stupid our system of government, basically the people in our government are, but also our government system leads to this, and that brings us into my strategic view, and we'll most probably move on to that, elegantly later on. But I'm interested to hear what Alistair has to say. By the way, what I've just I've deliberately put something provocative and extreme, and some people could even say unlikely, but if you're a student of military history or world history, you'd understand that nothing's unlikely, especially if you are the supreme power of the world. Once people have power, they want to exercise it.
Yeah, you go ahead, Alistair.
Stephen? No, you say what were you going to ask?
No, I think in a roundabout way, Kevin's raised a really good point. We're always focused on which submarine are we going to buy next and which aircraft are we going to buy next, and we spend all these billions of dollars doing that. But when are we ever addressing decentralizing our major cities? Strategically, is that more powerful than actually building up our military capabilities? And I'll direct that at you quickly first, Kevin, and then I'll get Alistair's thoughts.
Look, it is, and there are a whole lot of other things which have been raised, and you had a discussion. Oh no, it was Joel Jamal. My apologies, but Joel Jamal had a very interesting discussion with Professor David Flint about the fact that we need more states in Australia, because if we had more states, we would actually have more industry, more growth. The reason that we have this high concentration in capital cities is that all of the money of New South Wales goes into this black hole, which is basically Sydney. And if it doesn't go there, it goes to Wollongong and to Newcastle. The same for Queensland. All of the money has gone into Brisbane, and the northern area has been largely disregarded. So, you know, as part of dispersion, we need to break up Australia into a multitude of states. That's and the last thing I would say is that, and I do paint it, what I've just described to you is an extreme, but you think about it, we often criticize ourselves that we prepare to fight the next war using the last war, basically gearing ourselves up for the last war. And we just did it tonight during this discussion. We said, look, when the Japanese looked at our country and said it's going to take this number of divisions to conquer it. But the Japanese didn't have the capacity to wipe out 78% of the Australian population before they even arrived on our shores. Think about that. And they didn't have the biggest navy in the world. And they didn't have 1.4 billion people. And they weren't the manufacturing center of the world. It's just, you've got to look at this and you've got to think extremes, because our survival depends on it. And the one thing you can be sure about history is that the extremes happen. There have been enormous, awful things that humans have done to other humans throughout our whole history. And wiping out a nation is not beyond the pale. Yeah. Look what the Germans did. 1942, they went through and they tried to exterminate all of the Slavs as they moved eastwards. And sorry, Alistair, I've taken too much time. Over to you, mate.
No, it's okay. I was driving to Western Australia back in, I think, the 1970s, and the only station I could get was the ABC. Generally, I'd drive in silence as a result of that, but normally. But Bob Hawke was giving the boy a lecture. And he was actually advocating that we got this all wrong. You draw a line, you say, well, that's South Australia, and it's actually like a square with a bit down the bottom that's wiggling because of the sea. And he said that was entirely wrong. Now we've got to settle down and actually look at this. And what he wanted to do was form other states. North Queensland, Northwestern Australia, around Albury-Wodonga, that whole area there would be cut out of New South Wales and Victoria and re-established into something quite different. And he came up and he said, we need about 10 states. But he wasn't advocating more governments as such. He was advocating exactly what you're pointing out there, that dispersion from a centralized Kremlin, if you like, in Canberra, would be a great way of actually expanding the growth, because people would then have an incentive to get people into their area. Now, if you're the Premier of Queensland, living on the border of New South Wales, which you virtually are, why would you care about Townsville or Cairns? And then when you have a Premier up there that has a lockdown in Mount Isa because the nearest COVID case at that stage is 1,620 kilometres away, then you know you've got a problem.
Well said, well said.
Well, you know who that was. Anyway, so he was advocating that. That's one thing. The other thing was, of course, Colwell came up with the phrase, apart from two wrongs don't make a white, terrible phrase. But the other one he came up with, populate or perish. And that was when they started the 1948 influx of migrants. I mean, that came much later than that. The 10-pound poms, the Balts that came in huge numbers. They started bringing people in here to populate or perish because they looked at the fact that in World War I, Kevin, we actually had 5 divisions. In World War II, we couldn't raise 5 divisions, and yet the population increased by 2 million.
Yep.
And part of the reason for that was we needed people to actually sit around the coast and watch the sea and see if someone's going to invade Australia. But, we actually only put the 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th divisions overseas, and then, of course, lost the 8th division. So we ended up with 3 divisions, and we had to bring 2 of them back to Australia right away to actually defend Australia and then move into the islands. But,
and, we almost lost one in Rangoon.
And that comes back to another thing about the size of the island.
Oops. Alistair's frozen. You're back again.
He's back.
Yeah, I'm back again. You disappeared, actually. So and this is what I wrote into that one that you've actually seen there. I wrote it for Michael Darby's Unchained Australia. He asked me to write a chapter, and he ended up getting 54 pages. So I did a bit of analysis on defending Australia for him. And a few things in there about, are we fight? And that was a question you just raised there. We fight in the last war or the next war? Now, I'm not sure if he's on tonight, but Brigadier Bernard, who was my commander in 3 Brigade, and also he was the Commandant of Staff College, one of the questions they asked just the Australian students, we didn't ask the foreigners, was, what is the greatest threat to Australia and how would you deal with it? 59 students wanted more aircraft carriers, bigger guns, more people, and a bigger army. One student said the greatest threat to Australia is the silent invasion. And he got castigated.
Well, that's exactly what I'm dealing with here. You're absolutely right, Alistair. You're absolutely right.
In fact, Brigadier Bernard, I went and complained about the rating I got. I got a C- or something. I went and complained. They got it upgraded. Because I said, actually, and my scenario at the time was, Suharto will die. Indonesia will go into being a failed state with everyone fighting with everyone else. And about 600 to 1 million Indonesians will get in boats and come to Northern Australia. And what are we going to do? We're going to accept them because we've signed the UN Convention on Refugees. And then when you get 1 million of them there, and 20 years later they refuse to go home, and now they start saying, we want a Muslim state in Northern Australia. What are we going to do? We're going to secede. We're going to let them secede. And that silent invasion was what I saw as the greatest threat. Now, it didn't happen with the Indonesians, but it's not happening with other nations, apart from Lakemba in Sydney. Which is the only place I can see that will secede from Australia. You'll know more about that, Stephen. But the point there is that we don't have that sort of secession threat or that sort of invasion threat in the numbers that people are liable to have into Australia from other countries. But that is one of the ways that we've got to actually look at how are we going to deal with the fact that we're now bringing in people who are not assimilable. And if you're not going to be assimilated, then you're going to resist the existing culture that was already here. And secondly, you may have seen these 2 cases, which are actually related to the cultural future and sovereignty of Australia. The 2 cases where a guy bought a place in 2013, built a bridge across the creek in 2014, and 10 years later, he was fined $5,000 because he disturbed the rainbow serpent. And you might have seen the other one that just came up 2 weeks ago where 2G Council was fined $8,000 for disturbing the rainbow serpent. So, I mean, we are actually dividing ourselves in, and Keith Windshuttle had pointed this out a long time ago. We are breaking down into tribes. And if anyone can come up with any idea for a tribe, be it teals, be it greens, be it anyone else that's diversive to Australian sovereignty, then you have the answer as to why this country will not be defensible. Now, I'll just mention something here. I've got an article here, which is in Camaraderie, and it's about Peter Leahy, who I have a lot of respect for, until now, that is. Where he said the reason people are not joining the Australian Defence Force and it's struggling with recruitment is that there's a lost national pride and people have adopted a sense of entitlement. I don't think he's actually quite right. He then said that last year, the Albanese government said it would grow the armed forces by about 20,000 by 2040, but in fact, we're going backwards. And he said this is through the lack of national identity and people don't want to serve and they don't want to do the work that's involved in the Defence Force. What he's failed to mention there is the sheer lack of leadership of the people in the Defence Force. And I'll give you one example, which I'm personally aware. A young fellow I know, bodybuilder, wanted to join as a private in infantry. Now, he wasn't born in Australia, so he needed a sponsor. So I was his sponsor. So I wrote him a very good, reference.
Reference.
And so he went along and he put it in. 12 months later, they came back and said, sorry, it's expired. You need to get another one. So this time he got 2, one from me and one from someone else's in the army. Even more illustrious, far more illustrious career than me. So he got the 2 of them and he put them in again. 13 months later, he finally was accepted into the army. So that was 25 months between his first application and getting in. Now, I was looking here at, I've got a thing here, an article too, that points out 69,000 people applied to join the military. And yet we fell 28% short of recruiting numbers. The company that was doing it at the time was French. Very good. And then they got sacked. And we took on a Swiss company who've had it for the last 3 years. And I've just been reading this thing here about, how there's been all sorts of, in fact, Matt Keogh had written to them saying your performance is way below any acceptable standard. And they said, okay, yeah, we'll hire a few more psychologists. 8 months later, he wrote to them again and said, your performance is getting worse. So they paid them more money. And finally, we're now thinking we might sack them. And I'm not sure who will get after the Swiss. Probably the North Korean or the Chinese, recruiters will probably be given the job of checking out the security of people who want to join the army. I mean, this is. I don't call it stupid. It's not stupid. It's beyond that. And so, what chance do we have when we've got one of the better leaders I've ever come across, Peter Leahy, is saying, it's the fault of the recruits and it's the fault of the Australians. So it's not the fault of the army leadership, which is so pathetic. You've got Campbell saying, you must fire your weapon with respect. And by the way, remove that tattoo of the Phantom, because we don't want any symbols of death in our army. And he did say that. And then, of course, you've got Morrison, who had the Jedi Council. The man who said the standard you walk by is the standard you accept, and got the Australian of the Year for that. Good grief. Yet he did nothing. He sacked people who were innocent. He and just made a complete mess of the whole thing. Now, someone's like, Graham's actually pointed out something here, that we can't defend Australia by ourselves. He's almost right. I mean, if the Fijians attacked us, we've got a fair chance of fighting them to a draw. But he's quite right in that if someone serious was to attack Australia, we need friends and allies. We used to have the British, and Curtin realized that the British were not going to be here to protect us after the loss of Singapore and the repulse and the Prince of Wales. So we called on the Americans, and the Americans have been our friends ever since in this regard. We've never been under threat, but we've helped the Americans out half of their wars, and including Vietnam, where we lost 506 dead and 2,500 wounded, which was a fair contribution for a country like Australia. But so what you're facing here is we need friends. So an American senator about 6 weeks ago said, Australia's not pulling its weight. You promised to spend, I think it's 2.3% in your budget. You didn't. And so why would we come and defend you when you won't actually pull your own weight and, get yourself a decent sized army? And I won't comment on Graham's comment about the banking and real estate laws, but that's another issue. But our Prime Minister got on TV and rather pointedly pointed out that we would not be taking advice from Americans on how to defend Australia. And by the way, can you see the bruise on my forehead where I banged my head off the wall? I mean,
how to win friends and influence people, Alistair? How to win friends and influence people, eh? These are our allies.
This goes off the fence, but it's too good to miss. This goes off the fence, but it's too good to miss. Trump said, okay, you guys are going to have to pay 25% tariffs on your steel and aluminium. And the reason they're doing that is because we subsidize both of those. And he said, well, if you subsidize them, you're able to sell to us cheaper than we can manufacture in America, only because you're dumping on us. And what was our reaction to that?
One of indignation.
What was the reaction? what was better than that, we then offered Whyalla another $2.2 billion.
Well,
So
that's
that
for
was
green
Trump.
energy. You know, that's so that we won't warm up the planet, Alistair. Mate, get with the program.
It means we produce. Doesn't matter. The point there is we're now subsidizing again, which means if I were Trump, or I can't remember the senator's name that did this, I say, great, the tariffs are now 80%. We'll say, we'll up you to 100. We'll give another $2 billion, 120%, another $2 billion, 140%. I mean,
as Graham Hood and John Larder said, you couldn't make this stuff up. Look, the whole thing of climate change, it just points to the lack of intelligence, or, you know, just the cravenness of our political class. Because if they took 10 minutes to look at how they came up with that preposterous assertion that 97% of climate scientists agree, they would see that it was a blatant fraud. If they took the time to look at the temperature graphs from the last 140 years, they would see that the Earth's climate has actually been cooling, not warming. Yeah. And if they took the time to look at the last 8,000 years, they would see that it's been steadily cooling for the last 8,000 years, and that the Earth's climate was much warmer 8,000 years ago, and everybody was prospering and multiplying, and plants were growing and so forth. And ever since then, carbon dioxide concentration has been rising as the Earth's climatic temperatures have been dropping. Now, this is all there. I even flew to Canberra at my own expense and showed Michael McCormack, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister, all of these graphs, and his response was, "Oh, I haven't seen this before. Did he do anything? Put your hands up if you think he did." I see no hands, as Lord Christopher Monckton would say. I see no hands. This is what we're faced with. And you wonder why defence is in a mess. They're idiots. Sorry, I'm getting carried away here. I will calm down.
You know, we need to. I took you down another rabbit hole there with climate, which is another subject. Except, of course, Admiral Barry wrote this paper, which was actually given at RISI, and I actually offered to write a rebuttal to it. Now, Barry still says, and he's now Professor ANU, remember, he now says that the greatest threat to Australia is not the Chinese, it's not the Muslims, it's not anything, it's climate. And we should now refocus the defence force to fighting climate. I want to know when we win.
What an embarrassment. What an embarrassment the man is. I actually feel like sending back my graduate diploma in strategic studies, courtesy of the ANU. Because that place has just dropped to it's never mind. Anyway, yep, valid point, Alistair, valid point.
I've got a comment here from Graham, which is one of his best. He says Albanese is about as sharp as a bowling ball, which probably sums up the political situation here in Australia. But
okay,
look, I'm finding
getting back to the subject.
I'm finding this
getting back to the subject.
Yeah, you go, Alistair. Go.
Okay. I mean, one of the things in that paper that I sent to both of you, Kevin's probably read it, and you might not have it.
I have, yeah.
Okay. Well, the point there was you decide who your enemy is. We've decided it's going to be the Chinese. Now, they get 1.4 million people, and we get 25 million. So it's not going to be a fair fight, because we know we're equivalent to every 100 of them. Now, in fact, when you look at it, Israel is outnumbered 33-1, but they've won every war. So it's not necessarily the numbers that count. It's what you do with the numbers you've got and what sort of defense force you've got. Now you know who the enemy is. How are you going to deal with them? Well, for a start, you give them all a pager and then you blow up the pager, right? As the Israelis did. You come up with clever ways of dealing with this. Now, we're not coming up with clever ways. All we do...
well, if I could just leap in there, that Israel has the capacity and the means to deliver nuclear weapons. And they actually, Golda Meir actually considered doing that. First point. I have friends who served on the Golan Heights, and they came back to me and they said the reason that the Israelis win every time is they're fighting Arabs. Now, that's a naughty thing to say, but that's the reality.
In the future, not just the fact that they're Arabs, because
But if I could just say, in the future, we are faced with a country that could be, if it keeps on its present trajectory and we keep on, basically destroying ourselves, the Western economies, that is, it will be the supreme power of the world. It has oodles of nuclear weapons. We have none. And if it will be able to do whatever it wants to do. Now, it might not decide to kill us all off, though in the past, countries that have been in a similar position to the Chinese, or what the Chinese will be in the future, that's exactly what they did to the other tribes and the other countries. They exterminated them. And if, people say, this is just too fantastic. I'm just looking back at history. I'm just looking at how humans behave, especially if they're racially and culturally homogenous. They tend to look down at other people, and they call them Untermensch, subhumans. And that then allows them to dispose of those persons without a twinge of conscience. That's what we're facing.
Pauline actually just put something up there about defence net zero strategy. There is now a department in Defence that actually deals with looking at all our plans to make sure that we don't have a carbon footprint while we defeat the enemy.
Look, if I can leap in there too, Alistair, I actually wrote to the Minister of Defence, the Secretary of Defence, the CDF, and the 3 service chiefs saying, listen, Jim Molan, who was a friend of mine, and I were worried about the fact that we've only got 24 days of liquid fuel in this country. We have a limited capacity to manufacture liquid fuels. And here I've been working, or I have peripherally been involved with the University of Queensland. They've developed a technique for taking carbonaceous material and turning it into liquid fuels. Would you consider setting up a pilot project using defence funds to the tune of about $20 million? I received a reply back from Major General Jason Walk, and it said basically what you're saying now, that Defence is pursuing clean fuels, or clean, low carbon fuels, I think it was, low carbon fuels. Now I can just imagine a tank trundling around the battlefield with hydrogen under extreme pressure in a canister on its back, or anything else. It's just a nonsense, an utter and total nonsense. We have the capacity using coal, and Professor Plimer raised this not very long ago in a podcast. We have the capacity using coal to create liquid fuels like Sassoil in South Africa, like the Germans did during the Second World War. And during the Second World War, I won't get ahead of myself, for 30 cents a litre. And the big breakthrough here is that they've reduced excise by half. And I went and filled up my car today, and I'm still paying well past $1 a litre. And I'm thinking to myself, if we could produce fuel at 30 cents a litre, let's let the wholesalers make 100% profit. Wholesalers and distributors make 100% profit. So that's 60 cents. And then we'll let the government take 30 cents on top of that. That's more than a 30% excise. We've still got our fuel for 90 cents a litre. Yet for some reason, we're paying close to $2 a litre. And we don't have, if we get cut off within 24 days, there will be no fuel in this country. You've already seen what happened with Cyclone Alfred. All of the shops, the shelves go bare within 24 hours. What do people do for something like 4 weeks if there's no food? I suggest they starve, or they start eating bark, or start killing cats and dogs. This is crazy crap. And yet Defence is sitting there saying, we're going to have low carbon fuels. And the government knows that it can produce liquid fuels at 30 cents a litre, but it doesn't want to. Why would that be, I wonder? I just don't understand this. It's just unfathomable to me.
Yeah. By the way, you might have seen that this thing about the fuel has been brought up because under the international standard, we're supposed to hold 90 days of 3 fuels: diesel, what we call petrol, and avgas or avtar. Kerosene. Kerosene. That's basically, I was in the oil industry for 16 years. So what we were supposed to do is actually have that stored. Now, you really do have to store it as crude oil, because Avtar, as you know, and avgas goes off after about 6 months, especially if you have it
absolutely
sitting
right.
Yeah. So you'd have to keep turning over 90 days worth and really have that in the right places to be able to do that. Alternatively, what you do is what the Americans have done. You find a big cave, you fill it full of oil, crude oil, and you have it near a refinery like Dallas or I can't remember the other place they've got there, the biggest one in the world. So you have it near there, so you can actually just draw it down. Now, actually, there's another story there, because we actually did that. We bought our reserves and put them into America, and America's since depleted those reserves. I don't know if we ever got paid back for them, but I noticed that we actually $1 million worth of our fuel to the Americans to bring down the American oil price, American price at the pumps, because it was affecting his Biden's actually popularity. So anyway, the point here is we need the refining capacity, because if we have ships coming constantly here, they can be interdicted. And where are they coming from? They're either going to come through the Red Sea or through Singapore, which can be easily interdicted, especially if the Chinese are coming our way.
Or through the Panama Canal, if you were storing your fuel in America. Where they stored it was in Georgia, I believe, in caves.
No.
I'm thinking about the reserve that we had. They would either have to move it by rail across America and ship it out of a place like San Francisco or whatever is a deep water port on that side conveniently located, or they have to take it through the Gulf of America, through the Panama Canal, and bring it over to Australia. It was an absolutely ridiculous reserve. It was on the opposite side of the planet. You couldn't get further away from Australia than where they stored that reserve. It's just nuts. And the point you make is a very valid one, Alistair. Well, you've got to have the refining capacity, and that refining capacity has to be functioning. If it's in a capital city, bye-bye capital city.
Yep. No, you see, they tricked you, because they stored it in Texas, and the idea was to actually sail it past Florida and South Africa and come that way.
Oh, okay. See? Thanks, mate.
You would never have thought of that, would you?
No, I wouldn't have. No.
Look,
so were they going to take it to Kwinana in Western Australia, were they? Is that the plan?
Yeah. Which is right on the coast, which is, of course, very easy to target. And by the way, Kwinana can't make all the. It's got a problem in that you can't make all the fuels out of what you get.
That's correct.
Because it's basically set up for the light fuels that come out of Iran.
That's right. Yep.
It was actually set up for the
now you guys are raising so many issues. Now there's a quote that it is never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. Now. which like, is it malice? Is all of this stuff intentional?
No, stupidity. And the very first thing I talk about if we ever get into the strategy side is our system of government. You've got to fix our system of government. You've got to have people sitting at the top of all of our departments, because the defense of this country isn't just the Defense Department. It's Treasury, Finance, primary industries. It's everything. It has to be a holistic approach. And if you've got idiots who were actually elected to represent their constituents, and some of these idiots then transfer across to be ministers of state and be running government departments, and the people who are the public servant heads are moribund type who, through a selection and promotion system, were promoted on the basis that they are team players, conventional thinkers, and never would try anything adventurous. You've got all the formula for failure. So the very first thing, if we're serious about the defence of this country, we have to reform our structure of government. We have to popularly elect the Governor-General and the governors of the states, and they have to be the chief executive of the administrative branch, called the executive branch, of our government. If you don't do that, you're stuffed right from the beginning. And that's why we went to the Korean War armed with rifles which were developed in the Boer War, when the Americans had semi-automatic Garands in 1931. I mean, I can point to, this was my wake-up. When I developed those rifles back in the 1970s, I started asking myself questions. Why is it that I have a pack, which is really a sugar bag with straps on it, instead of a proper, load-carrying frame? Why am I walking around in hobnail boots with mud gaiters? Why is my uniform totally inappropriate to the environment in which I'm working? Why am I armed with a rifle that has a hinge in the middle of it such that the moment that I knock it, it's no longer in sight? It's too bloody long to carry. It kicks like a mule and bruises my face so that most shooters become gun shy. Why is it that we have such terrible equipment? And why do we go to war with this terrible equipment? My father-in-law went into Tobruk and he was armed with 45 Thompson machine guns because this country couldn't provide him with an adequate machine gun, a personal machine gun. We had the Bren gun, which was an abortion. It had no means of being able to load the magazines. You had if you can imagine, you're shit scared and you're trying to load a magazine in the mud and the blood and the guts and the beer while the enemy's coming at you. That was the Bren, and it could only be fired right-handed. And I could go on. And I know that Alistair sort of died the leap in here, so I'll give you the opportunity. Go for it, Alistair.
There's a guy, he wrote a book called Starlight. He was a doctor in 5RAR in 1966, when 5RAR went to Vietnam. And by the way, they had one soldier killed in the first night. It was the first national serviceman to be killed, and that was Private Noack, who was shot by another Australian. But the point there was he actually was given a shell dressing in case he got wounded, and he kept it. He didn't use it during his time in Vietnam, and he put a photo of it in his book, and it was actually manufactured in April 1915, and that's what we were issuing in 1966 to soldiers going to Vietnam as a shell dress, as your the thing that you would actually use to prevent the bleeding and to stop infection. Yeah, right. 1915. So there you go. What's his name? Tony White. His book Starlight is a very good read. Anyway, the other thing, can we have a look at some of the defense things, like the structure? What we've done is we've prepared to fight the last war, which is one of the reasons why we're going to lose. But then again, we keep changing the structure. We've just bought a number of, I just want to give you one little bit of history here about how we buy weapons. Now, this is sorry about telling you all about DMO, but let me give you this one. The Hanwha Armoured Artillery. By the way, in the Australian Army, we have never had armoured artillery. Not in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, anywhere. Never had it. So we finally decided to get it, and the decision was actually taken to actually look into armoured artillery in 2009. Now, let me see if I can do the maths. That's 16 years ago. In 2010, they actually placed an order. In 2012, we cancelled the order. It was resurrected in 2019 when we ordered 30 vehicles. It was cancelled in 2023 on the grounds that we were now going to have the HIMARS, which of course is unarmoured. We then got back and we said, oh, no, we'll get the Hanwha again. And so currently we've just ordered 120 of them. Now, I believe we've actually had some delivered to Australia already. So we've ordered, cancelled, ordered, cancelled, ordered, and we got some, which must be a mistake. We obviously did.
If I could leap in there and just to underline what Alice is talking about, the Battle of Long Tan was won by artillery, by firing, I think it was 25 pounders in those days. It might have been 105s, I'm not sure. But anyway, it was 105s, yeah. Now, the reason that the artillery were able to operate was that the North Vietnamese general forgot, or for some reason, his 120 millimeter mortars got separated from his force. If the Vietnamese had had those 120 millimeter mortars, they'd already trigged where the gun pits were. These gentlemen were firing those 105 howitzers out in the open, effectively. They were in a pit, but if a mortar round landed in there, goodbye the gun crew. And that underlines what Alice is talking about. They should have been in armoured artillery even at that stage, because if the enemy had been able to bring those 120mm mortars to bear on our gun positions, we would have been massacred. The only thing that saved our forces in Long Tan was danger close artillery.
Yep.
Look, both of you have made the very good case of what's going wrong. But Kevin, you'd know this, that I like to play the game, build your own fantasy government. So I'm going to do something a little bit different now. I'm going to be Prime Minister. I'm going to put you two in charge of defence, and you guys are going to tell me what we need to do as a country to better defend ourselves. Now, it's interesting, before, like, we haven't really been focusing more on the hardware side of things, and Kevin, you've identified there's, and so have you, Alistair, there's issues with immigration, there's issues with culture, there's issues with decentralizing our major cities. Maybe I'll start with you, Kevin, first, because you're the strategic guy here.
Yeah, sure. Look, the very first thing you need is a strong economy. Yeah, okay. I would say to the Prime Minister, we need a strong economy. We need a manufacturing industrial base that is self-sufficient, self-sustaining. So what I'd recommend to you is that you drop the company tax down to zero, and that will cause a whole lot of industry to want to come to Australia. The next thing you could do is fully automate your industry. We don't have to retrench people, because Hawke and all the rest of them have already fired off all of the factory workers. So when I bring back industry to this country and it's fully automated, then I can produce material far in excess of what my population would suggest. So that's the next thing we've got to do. The next thing is we've got to have an education system that aims at inculcating into our youth national pride and social cohesion. The next thing we need is self-sufficiency in liquid fuels. Without self-sufficiency in liquid fuels, we are toast, because if we get cut off, we run for about 24 days and everything will cease to function, including the Defence Force. We need inexpensive, reliable, abundant energy. And we've done everything we possibly can to have exactly the opposite. Having intermittent producers of electricity in the form of wind and solar injecting into your national grid is a recipe for dysfunction, and that is exactly what we have. The cost of electricity has risen by 7 times greater than the CPI since 2007. We've got to cultivate goodwill with our neighbours. And the way that we cultivate goodwill is that we have to be able to speak to them. So I would establish the world's best English-speaking training website, so that all of my neighbours can speak English, and then they can participate in the Western economy and become prosperous. If they become prosperous, if I have neighbours who are prosperous, they are capable, more capable of defending themselves. And also, you would know that if you're living in a neighbourhood where everybody is prosperous, you don't have to lock your door. A prosperous neighbour does not pose us any threat. Neighbours that are struggling do. I've mentioned dispersing the population and the critical infrastructure. This is absolutely essential, and we've talked about possible strategies, which is developing more states, but we need desperately to depopulate the capital cities. And this plays into another thing demographically. I told you we have 15 million square kilometres of land. So we have plenty of land to release and use for urban development, where we can provide cheap land, cheap, fully serviced land to young married couples, so that they can have a house and 800 square metres of land for less than $300,000. And a mortgage on that would be less than most young married couples are presently paying in rent. Do that, and the young married couples will feel that they have the necessary stability to have children. At present, we are running at 1.3, which will, in the next 50 years, our race, our culture will be extinct. You stop unbridled immigration. You stop foreign nationals from owning residential land and farmland. This is critical. The next question is, should we pursue nuclear weapons? And I'm firmly of the opinion we should. We should do it most probably covertly, not overtly. We should put in place the necessary such that we can acquire nuclear weapons if we feel it's necessary in a very short period of time. And we should definitely develop the means of delivering them. And the last part of this is, okay, where is the threat likely to come from? And I say it's China. Now, I'm not saying that China is our immediate enemy. I'm not saying they're our enemy. I'm just simply saying that if any threat should manifest itself external to this country, it will be China. But we have a huge problem within our country, and we need to address it. We have no social cohesion. We're bringing in people, as Alistair has rightly pointed out, who do not assimilate easily into our country. We have in our constitution a clause which allows the government to make special laws on the basis of a citizen's race. That should be gotten rid of. And instead, we should prohibit any government at any level within the Commonwealth from making laws or constructing regulations that discriminate in any way on the basis of a citizen's race, sex, or ancestry. Now, I put this to numerous politicians, and none of them have enthusiastically embraced it. And so I put now to our audience the question, would you agree with this if it was a referendum question? Would you agree with getting rid of Section 51, subsection 26, and inserting into our Constitution a specific prohibition of any government or any government-funded entity from making laws that discriminate in any way on the basis of a citizen's race, sex, or ancestry? If you do that, the Aboriginal industry is no longer constitutional. Native title, which is another vector by which the foreigners intend to take control of our country, native title is unconstitutional. And we can get rid of then rubbish like the rainbow serpent and all of the other impediments to us putting this country on steroids and doing something to fix up our economy. And with that, we would have then the foundations necessary for a defence force. And that's when Alistair comes in, because he's got a whole lot of good ideas. If we had the economy, he has a lot of material and other ideas, but there's no point in having these ideas if we don't have the industrial wherewithal, nor the national will. So that's where you've got to start. And we've got to, as I've already mentioned, we've got to get a government that is populated, and when I talk about the government, I'm talking about the executive branch, that is populated by the best people we can find in the world to drive our government departments, because without that, we're going to go to war with Boer War 303s again, or something the equivalent. Over to you, Alistair.
Before we get to Alistair, I just want to read out some comments. Dilemma says, can you imagine if Kevin was our Prime Minister? Can you imagine our place on the world stage? So that's high praise from Dilemmas. Graham says, Kevin makes some good points, common sense points. And Dilemmas says, where do I sign up? So the best place to sign up is by heading to Australians for Better Government /join. And you can join them.
Yes! Good on you, Stephen. Good on you. Fantastic.
Yeah, that's
well done,
where
Stephen.
You sign up, Dilemmas. But look, before we get to Alistair, I'm gonna touch on one thing you said, Kevin, and you were talking about all these immigrants coming into Australia and not assimilating. I'm going to make the argument to you that even some of our youth are not assimilating because they're being indoctrinated in our schooling. They're being taught to hate our country and hate our history and our culture and everything. They're not assimilating to the way that Australia should be either. Do you think that's a fair argument?
Absolutely. That was one of the points I made, that critical to the defence of this country is an education system that imbues into our youth pride in our country. And there's got to be pride and also social cohesion. In other words, you come down very heavily on anybody who tries racial discrimination, sex discrimination, that they should be things which our youth have imbued into them, that this is morally, ethically wrong, and it's actually counter to our survival as a society. But we've also got to create an environment where the young married couples feel that they can afford to have children, and they can't at this moment. And that's another thing that needs to be inculcated into our youth. The idea that, yes, look, you should have children. It's actually in our genetic makeup. You will be very happy if you have children. And the government's role is to create an environment where there's security and there's empowerment for our young people to be able to have children. And it's not doing it. It's doing everything the opposite. You know, gay shows and the promotion of homosexuality and aberrant lifestyles, which are not conducive to good, strong, healthy families and happy families.
Look, yeah, we'll bring in you now, Alistair. Is there anything you disagree with what Kevin said, or do you want to add to it?
There was one, actually. I think you can't say we can't have any discrimination against anyone based on whatever. Otherwise, I'll start mowing Druid sect and start having human sacrifices again, and you won't be able to object to that. The thing is,
that's not actually true. By the way, with what I just described before, there's a caveat always that you cannot have, for example, a religion which goes against our laws. So, for example, if your religion requires human sacrifice, then that's a stupid example, of course. Or if it requires polygamy, then no, sorry, our law does not permit you to do that.
Well, you've got two.
And by the way, I deliberately left religion out of that. I said race, sex, and ancestry, and I deliberately left the thorny issue of religion out of there because I am looking for 90% of the Australian people to say, "Yep, I'll vote for that." Yep. And some may say, "Oh, can we put in religion?" And I'd say, "No, we'll leave that to one side."
Yeah, you might have noticed that Tony Burke has just quietly approved the influx of 26,500 Afghans.
That's right.
Yeah, and that's in addition to the Gazans and everyone else we've got in. I made the point, actually, that when I looked at somewhere like Malmo and a few of the other places in Europe, Dresden and so on, which wants to secede from Germany and become a Sharia state, when you look at those sort of things, and I was driving back through Melbourne at night, and I saw, I think she was in a uniform, probably a nurse, walking down the street by herself, going to the tram stop where she was going to wait for a tram. When that becomes too dangerous for a woman to do that, we know we've completely screwed this country, and it's getting to that state. Because I don't know if either of them are listening into this show now, but I know two people whose daughters were raped while they were out walking years ago now. But the fact is that it was bad enough even then. It's got worse now. I was looking at some statistics from England as to who commits crimes, and it had down the bottom English, and the English was the bottom, but it had all these other nationalities above them, proportion of the people in the country who were committing crimes. And by the way, there was one there that violent crimes were most committed by people from the Congo. There was something like 16% of people from the Congo were actually criminals. Out of, say there's 100 of them, 60 of them were involved in violent crimes. Yeah, and I saw that's a good comment there about Candace Owen wasn't allowed in because she's divisive. And yeah, but we'll let in 26,000 people who will not assimilate and who will have marriages to their cousins, and they'll have 3. I mean, the guy who actually tried to blow up the MCG has now been released from prison, and he's gone back to his 4 wives. And I don't know how many kids he had, but he had about 6 the last time I looked. And he's living off Centrelink, as he will, until he decides his kids are old enough to blow someone up. Anyway, back to the subject, which was, what do you do about it now? Kevin's quite right. We need an economy that's capable of doing that. We killed off our manufacturing economy. Do you remember that Paul Keating was the one that said, if we can't do it in Australia cheaper than anywhere else, then we shouldn't be doing it? And so I took that to the black hole level and said, well, what happens if we can't do, no, we get rid of that. What happens if we can't grow wheat cheaper than the French? We get rid of that. What happens if we can't mine cheaper than the Argentinians and the Brazilians? Well, we stopped that. And what were we left with? Nothing. We're back in caves because there are things there as to why you need protection from other people who can always undercut you. By the way, we went out and had a Vietnamese meal. The main course was $20 a head, which is still bloody cheap when you think about it. We went to an Italian place and it cost us $100 a head. But $20 a head. And the same thing when I live in Vietnam would cost me about $2.50. Why would I live here when I can live there very comfortably in a civilized place. I can walk the streets at night. I've never been robbed. I've never even had anything stolen. When in Australia, I live in a gated estate, and we've had 3 burglaries in the last 4 weeks, and that's in a gated estate. And by the way, I don't lock the door. Why not? Because I'm hoping someone will come in so I can knife him. That's a joke.
I hope so. That's a joke. Let's make that very, very clear that was a joke. But it's interesting. I mean, I came into this podcast expecting you guys to talk about HIMARS and AUKUS, and
we're about to do that.
F-23s and 22s or whatever. But what you're really saying, and I think this is probably overlooked, is that to defend a country, it's a lot more than just the military hardware. It's all these
absolutely
the fabric of the nation that's more
absolutely.
Yep. Is that right?
Yep, it is. And we're developing a nation where no one's going to sign up. No one's going to be motivated to fight for this country. They will just roll over and say it doesn't matter.
The big question for you is, have we lost Australia already, or how close are we to losing Australia?
If we can fix up the government, then the government will fix all of this. If we had a competent government full of high-quality people, the government will look after that. That was the conclusion I came to. There are so many bushfires here that my colleagues, you included, we would spread ourselves so thinly that we would be ineffective. And so I then said, right, what we need to do is focus on fixing the government, because if we could fix the government, then the government will fix the problems, and all of these bushfires will disappear. These bushfires exist because of the ineptitude, the wickedness, I don't know what it is, the treason of many of the people who are involved in our government at this moment. We have a highly ineffective, badly defective government, and we've got to fix it.
We killed a lot of people up in a town, Marysville, here, during the Black Saturday bushfires in Victoria. And the mayor of the town had actually refused to let them have a burn-off late in the season, because they had rains and there was a lot of growth coming up again. It was still relatively green, so there'd be lots of smoke around, and it would have sort of, just gone away. So she refused to actually let them burn off. And of course, come January, it all dried out, and they killed 45 people. And she was re-elected.
Yes.
As the mayor.
Yep.
No criminal charges for negligence or malfeasance or anything like that. And comes the next election, I'm the best person to burn your town down again. And, so,
and if I could just leap in there, one of the suggestions I've made to government, of course nothing's ever happened, is that there should be a website which shows, in a graphical form, easily understood by the person in the street, what the program is for hazard reduction. And then there should be an overlay, which you can do, which will show you what they've achieved. And so, in other words, the public would become aware of the fact that they start off with this plan for hazard reduction, but they never follow through on it.
I know.
That's what's needed.
The EPA in Victoria actually pointed out that they'd put out a plan as to how much had to be burnt and when it had to be burnt. You have to start the burning in September, and it goes right through until early November, which means everything's okay for the sort of holiday season. And in fact, they pointed out that the government kept cutting the budget until it only got 27% of the money it needed to go out and start these fires and control them. So by the time they actually did start to go out and burn off, the winds, we have a very windy season here in Victoria every October. And so they started burning off in October, and some of these fires got away. So they actually stopped them. And so they said, oh, we can't have any more burn-offs, which actually made the projection worse. And I made a prediction actually last year, which turned out to be wrong. I said that this summer would be absolutely horrendous for bushfires. Well, it hasn't been, because we've had a global cooling summer. We've hardly had a day over 35 degrees. And there's been a lot. It was raining last night again.
Didn't you hear it's the hottest year on record, Alistair? Haven't you heard that from Teals?
No, I saw that.
Allegra Spender and all those people.
Yeah.
I don't know
Ever.
where. It
Yeah.
must have been on Mars
All
or
right,
somewhere.
can I get back onto a couple of things here? I just want to mention, actually, let's start off with the dud plane, one that shouldn't be allowed to fly. It's called the F-35. I have a good friend who was a senior officer in the RAAF who gave me lots of interesting information on it, and because he opposed it, it virtually killed his career. And he sort of was sidelined, and then, of course, he's resigned since then. There's a couple of things about it. As he actually said to me, the trouble with the F-35, it's an all-purpose fighter, come bomber, come everything. And the end result is that it's not good enough to be a fighter. It can't turn, it can't fly faster, and it can't bomb. And it's got a limited range because they try to do everything with it. And so it doesn't do anything well. If it comes up a fighter like an F-16 or an F-22, it'll be shot out of the sky. If it comes up against anti-aircraft artillery, it'll be shot out of the sky. If it tries to run away from the planes that are now chasing it, it can't go fast enough. So, in fact, it's a dud. But it's got this other thing, and I actually found the website, which I'd heard about this a long time ago. What they came up with was the bright idea. This sounds really clever. You would really think of this. Every time it takes off, you log into the Lockheed Martin website. And you say, I'm about to take off. Now, what it does, it says, well, Kevin's been flying around now for 2 hours, so we'll add 2 hours to the wear and tear on every part of that plane. And so, right, Kevin, you're up to 85 hours. You've only got 15 hours left before we got to replace that part. Great. Except you're in a fighter and you don't want people to know where that you are. Now, there's a catch to that, because Lockheed Martin can get in and say, yeah, we don't like Kevin, and they can hit the kill switch and stop your plane flying. They can stop you getting off the ground, or they can kill it in the air. So, and in fact, I found the website that said they now claim that the only people in the world who've actually managed to override that were the Israelis. Why am I surprised? But apparently we haven't overridden that, because one of the things is, and the whole idea was that Lockheed Martin can say, oh, you're going to need these parts, so before you run out, we'll send them to you. And so they're going to send you the parts out long before you need them, and so you can have them in stock. Except, what's the problem, Kevin?
Mate, I'm gobsmacked. I'm up at the kill switch. But if you're talking about logistics and the parts, the first thing is you've got to obviously get the parts to us. The next problem is you've got storage. You've got to have technicians that are capable of actually doing the repair.
You're on the right track, but what happened was...
I'm a Ramey person.
No. We were the bottom of the queue. So when they actually had... They found out that the usage rate of parts was far higher than they actually expected. And by the way, the American F-35s are currently flying at the rate of about 40%. Their target was 80%. And the rest were in maintenance after that, because they require an enormous amount of maintenance after every flight. So the point there was that we were at the bottom of the queue. So we say, okay, we're going to need one of these before we can fly again. Sorry, we haven't got any of those at the moment. We'll have them again in 3 or 4 months. So in fact, a lot of our planes have not been able to get off the ground, which is probably the safest thing that could happen. There is another problem. What's the problem of heat?
It's visible. It's not visible on radar.
No, it's worse than that.
It's visible by satellites, yeah.
No, not just that. If you sit it out in the tarmac, you put it out in the tarmac in the morning in Darwin, and you go and have lunch, and you think, I'll go for a fly this afternoon. You press the button, and it won't start, because the temperature of the fuel is too high. And there's no air conditioner in it. There's no refrigeration in it to cool it down. So you need to store it. That's why it's called a hangar queen. You got to keep it in the hangar till you need it. You can't take it out and sort of pack it out ready to go.
Well, if I leave my mobile phone on the seat of my car and I try to use it, it says it's too hot. I thought that's where you were going. You'd hop into the cockpit and the electronics would say, sorry, I'm above 40 degrees centigrade. I can't possibly operate accurately, so it's unsafe to operate. I won't let you go.
Yeah, no, it does. It comes up and says your fuel's too hot.
But here's a question for you. This is from Dilemmas, Alistair.
Yeah.
How do we not have a massive Australian-made fleet of unmanned aerial and submersible drones constantly patrolling? Seems like everyone would win from a defense contract like that.
Oh, that's an easy one. Joel Fitzgibbon was the defense minister who actually said that we're not having armed drones. This is armed drones. You can have unarmed ones, but you can't have armed drones because they're an unfair weapon. Now, what did Colonel Hackworth say, Kevin?
Oh, if I could just leap in before I even go there, it's interesting you say that, because when I was the OIC of Operation Support Special Projects, one of the things we did with a group up here at Lismore and other consultants was develop a drone that could stay aloft for 36 hours, and it could carry 20 kilograms of weaponry, which meant we could have 40 half-kilogram rockets, which are very, very effective against cars and exposed infantry and even houses and bunker systems. And that was the first time that happened. The word came down from on high. Oh, no, you're not allowed to have a drone that can hurt anybody.
Right. That came from the minister. No, you got to take into account.
I went, oh no, this can't be true. But it is.
No.
It is.
Dutton came in and he never reversed that. We've now got Miles, and he's never reversed that. So we've never changed it and said that look, we'll have armed drones. And so and I'll come back to that in just a moment, because someone actually just asked the question there. So firstly, we're not going to have armed drones. What Hackworth said, now he was the lieutenant colonel, very highly decorated from Vietnam, and he actually said, if you find yourself in a fair fight, you made a bad plan.
That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, and I used to say that at staff college. I said the last thing you ever want to be is in a fair fight. You use anti-tank weapons against tanks. You don't use a tank against a tank. And, there are all manner of... what you've got to do is get a symmetry. You do not want a fair fight.
Okay, so what happened was that we didn't have any drones. And, in fact, I wrote an article that was published in an American journal about the Armenian... Azerbaijan war, in which Armenia lost 1/3 of its territory, and it lost every single tank it had. It lost every artillery to drones. And that was in 2020. And I said, this is the changing face of warfare. Now, you don't see among the leading militarized nations of the world, Azerbaijan and Armenia. A couple of nobodies, but they were fighting the next war. And the drones mainly came from Turkey, but the Azerbaijanis then started also buying Israeli drones. Now, the Israelis are very good at this because they also sold the same drone to the Armenians, who started fighting back with them. So they were on both sides. They couldn't lose. But the point there was they were now using armed drones, and Armenia lost 1/3 of its territory. That's like us losing Western Australia to the Chinese. Right? They take over the whole of Western Australia, 1/3 of Australia. That's what the Armenians lost in that war. So will we learn? Oh, yes. So there's a friend of mine, I think he might be online at the moment. He actually invented the first drone before the Americans had it or anything, and he was actually into model airplanes, and he put a camera in it. And it came to the idea that this is a really good idea. So he went down and tried to interest the RAAF in it through my contact, actually. And the RAAF looked at it, very senior officer looked at it and said, can't see any purpose for this. Go away. So I then got a bit annoyed at this. So I rang DMO, where I'd not been out of the army that long. I still knew people there. And they said, no, we only buy what we're told to buy. You got to talk to these people in Canberra. So he went up to Canberra and he demonstrated it. And they said, this is a good idea. And it went round and round in circles for about 3 years. And then the guy who actually said, this is a good idea, got posted. And the new guy came in and said, let's start again. So he gave up and he sold the whole idea to the Americans of how to use drones. Anyway, so that's how all that got started. But now we've got drones, and the Americans have got armed drones, and everybody's got armed drones. You've seen that the Ukrainians started just putting grenades into drones, flying them along, hitting the switch, thing drops down, went right through the turret of a tank, went right down the hole inside the tank and exploded inside and turned everyone into jam. But the point there was, we're now getting down to the simple drone that you can buy off the street, attach a grenade to it with a switch that actually says, my little Nintendo, I'll release that. Now, Australia, as you probably know, Kevin, has got 3 aerial reconnaissance regiments in its army.
No, I didn't know we had 3. I thought we had 1, but yeah, okay. So we got 3.
I got to show. But and we've also got a little drone which we can actually give to the infantry, who can fly it out. It makes a loud buzzing noise, sounds like a mosquito. Goes out there, and it actually is there for reconnaissance for the infantry. So instead of going out with a pair of binoculars and a man who's wearing a suit that can be caught in infrared from wherever and drop the drone on him, we now send out a drone. We can, but it can only go so far. The 3 regiments, one of them's called 20th Regiment, and I'll send you the video of this. It's so funny. There's a guy standing there with literally a paper airplane. It's made of balsa wood, and it's got a thing on it, and he runs down, he goes, launching, and he throws this thing, zzz, it takes off. And that's one of our artillery regiments, a 20th Reconnaissance Regiment. We have 3 of those, and they get a bit more sophisticated. And apparently we're now looking at a really sophisticated one. And so we're only 20 years behind where we could have been. So, I mean, it's just bizarre. And yet we don't have one armed yet. Now, I noticed one there where they actually said it has the potential to be armed. And that came from a senior officer, because they still have never said, we'll arm this thing. And of course, the new thing is that they actually were testing AI ones that actually make the kill decision. So it flies out there and it goes, well, I got a choice of Stephen, Alistair, nah, Kevin looks like the one. And it can come out and actually choose who it's going to kill. And it does that without any human intervention. There's a big problem there. You might kill Granny by mistake, or someone is, wasn't someone you intended. But so
tell me
this. World, drone warfare is now leading everything, and yet we won't have them. Our reconnaissance is poor. We don't have any armed drones. We have no intention of getting any in the near future. So we're fighting not even the next war, not even the last war.
But tell me this, Alistair, we're spending all these billions of dollars on AUKUS for these nuclear submarines. But then you see these light shows in Sydney of all these drones, and they can make all different shapes, and there's hundreds of them. What could a swarm of armed drones do to, say, the 3 Chinese warships that just came down?
Destroy them. No. The new thing is swarm warfare. It's actually called hive warfare, because they actually looked at birds that seem to be able to fly around without bumping into each other, and yet there's no central brain is doing that. And in fact, there's a very good video. It's actually AI that did this, because it hasn't really been invented yet. But what they've got is a series of small suicide nanobots, nanodrones. Then they fly up and they find they want to get into this place, but it's got a bulletproof window. So one of them goes up and smashes against it and blows itself up. Doesn't penetrate. So another one does the same thing. So these things keep suiciding until they actually crack the window. And then 1,000 of them go inside and take out the whole inside. Now, these are called hives. And what they're now looking at. Now, the Chinese, about 2 months ago, they've approved the design of a particular drone and said in the next 2 years, they're going to manufacture 1 million of them. 1 million? Well, there goes 5% of our population. So they're going to have 1 million of these armed drones within 2 years.
And how do they shoot these drones down? Is it possible for them to take these out?
Yeah,
with a shotgun.
With a shotgun, or in fact, you got things like the Aegis, which actually puts up a cone of fire, about 6,000 rounds, and just tries to hit, because these things will jink. They'll actually change course. It sees something coming, it realizes it's being detected, and it'll try and move out of the way. So you've got a shotgun. You got suicide drones that will actually track it down and run into it and blow it up. They're the main weapons. They've also got lasers that will now pick it up and actually shoot it down in 5 seconds. So this is why the solution to that, I mean, everything you invent, when it started with armor, then armor got thicker, then weapons got heavier, and crossbows would go through armor. So we kept adding more to it until armor became too heavy and it really didn't do everything that was necessary anymore. So what they're now looking at is that you're now going to go with drone swarms, including underwater drone swarms. What you have is a mothership that might be carrying 10 small homing torpedo-like things that you can set off and then leave them to their own devices to go and find whatever it is you set them to find. You might have picked up the sound of a particular ship. So you then program that into it and you go, and you send 10 of those. So the defenses can take down 9 of them, but the 10th one will get them. And so you now do.
By the way, they did that during the era during the Cold War, American submarines would shadow Soviet submarines, and they took basically their print of their screws, so that they could then, if they wanted to, program a computer in a Mark 48 torpedo to say, go after this, and it doesn't go after your submarine, it goes after the one that's making this has this particular print.
We've got a question here about the drones. Can EMF technology bring them down?
Yes, it can. At present.
No, not always. What they've now been doing, you might have noticed that
I'm sorry, if I can leap in there. I made a mistake then. I thought they were saying electromagnetic pulse, not electromagnetic force. Maybe they did mean electromagnetic pulse when they asked that question too, by the way. Sorry, Alistair.
Can you explain the difference?
Electromagnetic pulse could probably do it, but what they're doing now is that two things. Was that the Ukrainians started actually adding wires to it, so you could actually control it by wire. And you watch the camera, and then you pick the target, and then it goes in and kills. And I couldn't believe it. They were telling me that these wires are up to 30 kilometers long, very, very thin titanium wires that just scroll out for up to 30 kilometers. And these bloody things fly through forests and everything. I thought it was quite amazing that you could get something that would do that. The second thing is that's now been sort of overcome in various ways. So the next thing they're looking at now is they've now programmed AI into it. So once I tell them, go find Kevin and kill him, then it will go off and do its own thing until it finds you by the sound of whatever it's been told to look for. It has no contact with anything, and it's hardwired. So it will not be stopped by EMF or EMP. It's actually hardware that's actually driving it now.
I think they meant EMP, by the way, because electromagnetic force is really voltage. It drives electrons through a conductor. An EMP basically is a rapidly moving electromagnetic field, and it generates current within your circuitry that causes your circuitry to fuse. If they use EMP, then conventional DRAM basically it blows the memory out of anything, and the moment you don't have memory, your system ceases to work, and it doesn't matter whether you've got this wire going up to it. All of your electronics are basically destroyed by an EMP. And when an atomic weapon goes off, they did a trial on this, and the radius is about 5,000 kilometers for a particular size of atomic weapon. Exploded at 150 kilometers off or maybe 50 kilometers. It doesn't matter. Some height above the Earth, there is an optimum point, and you fire that, and all of the electronics for 5,000 kilometers are completely zeroed. Even your starter motor in your car is gone. Now, magnetic core memory, which was the predecessor of dynamic RAM, was resistant to EMP to a certain extent. Not totally resistant, but certainly far more resistant than DRAM. And perovskite crystalline memory, which is the next one on from a conventional DRAM, is very resistant to EMP. And I mentioned that at the beginning I was involved with what is called ferroelectric random access memory. And I actually had a patent, or a provisional patent, on the idea of combining the buses on a chip, so that we could make these at 1/3 the cost that they were presently costing. And these were very useful in electricity meters, and that's why I went through China talking to every manufacturer of electricity.
Okay, we're going way off topic now.
But this is the point, that EMP will completely destroy everything. None of your electronics will work if somebody whacks you with EMP by a nuclear bomb.
Okay, so Alistair, the last time we had you on, and it was probably over a year ago now, you concluded that what Australia needs to focus on is drones, long range missiles, and probably HIMARS and technology like that. Have you changed your view? Is that what we?
No, I haven't changed. In fact, HIMARS has just been extended so it can now fire about an extra 30 kilometers. So they now assist it, and it takes off. And HIMARS, of course, is able to direct. And this is why they were able to now fire this, whereas in World War I, you fired 6 million rounds on the Somme, and everybody got up and started fighting back immediately. So that didn't work very well. But now HIMARS is a one-shot, one-kill. If it sees the target and the target's doing 40 kilometers an hour, the tails on it will turn the artillery round to actually track the target and hit it, which is why they were able to actually be so successful with the HIMARS. Now, we bought, when he was challenged by Senator Roberts, General Campbell said, he was asked if we had HIMARS. He said, no, but we're thinking about it. Singapore's had them since 2009. The first ones were actually used in 2000, so they're a 25-year-old weapon, but we're thinking about it. You don't want to rush into these things. So anyway, we got 3 of them. We took them to Western Australia where we tested them for 3 years. And I believe we've now placed an order for some. I'm not quite sure the numbers, but apparently we're going to outfit at least 1 regiment, which will be about 12 guns, and then we'll have a few more. So I'll probably get about 19 of them or 18 of them or something. When you look at the numbers being used around the world, Singapore could take us out. I mean, they are heavily armed. They, as you know, had the strategy like Switzerland of being the poison prawn. We can't stop you. We're a small island state, but we'll make it so costly for you. You'll regret trying to take us out. And so they are actually quite heavily armed. They have a very motivated population of different nations who have been melded into.
We may have just lost Alistair.
He's frozen.
Yeah. All right, Kevin. He was making some really good points there, but we're probably at the end now. How would you like to conclude this discussion today? I mean, you raised some excellent points before about what we should focus on.
All of the things that Alistair talks about are not really achievable in the present environment. All of the stuff that Alistair is talking about, we have to import. And if we're cut off, we're not going to be able to import it. We have to be able to build these things here. We need a steel industry. We need a plastics industry. We need the ability to manufacture things using automation. You know, if you want to make 1 million drones and you've got a fully automated factory, it's very, very easy. And that's what we should be aiming at. We should be aiming at fully automated industry. Sorry, mate, go.
Here's a question I haven't asked, and I did have this ready. Do we need to increase our defense spending, or is the better question, do we just need to change the way that we spend what we're already spending, instead of...
Well, you're absolutely correct, but we are at now $1.3 trillion in debt when you consider the debt that the states have run up, a public debt as well. We're $1 trillion in the federal, and we're another 0.3 of a trillion, most probably more than that. Most probably, Alistair might be able to leap in there and give the exact figures. He has a brain for this, but we are so heavily in debt. And we are now faced with an interest bill of about $65 billion a year, which could have otherwise been spent on all sorts of useful infrastructure and putting in place the sort of plans I've talked about. So the very first thing we've got to do is we've got to stop spending. And that means that we've got to do what Dodge is doing in the United States. We need to go through all of the government departments with a brass brush and clean them out. We should get rid of our Department of Education. There are 4,000 people evidently in the Department of Education in Canberra or outposts. What the hell are they doing when every state has got a Department of Education? How can you have 4,000 people doing that? We are spending like drunken sailors, and this is actually putting us in jeopardy because somebody else will end up owning Australia, and we will be impoverished by the interest bills that we are faced with. So it's not only in defence. Defence is a wastrel, but it pales into insignificance compared to the ENDIS, compared to the education department. You can go through it. The Aboriginal industry is now 36, going $40 billion a year, and nothing is coming out of it except misery. We have now put ourselves, I keep on saying this, we have put ourselves well past north of $1 trillion. We've got nothing to show for it. Not a single thing that is of enduring value in this country for that 1 point whatever trillion dollars that they have wasted of our money. That's terrifying to me.
Alistair, I'm going to finish up tonight by asking you this last question. Can we rely on America to defend us anymore?
No. No. We never could, by the way. They've been President Thuy of Vietnam said it perfectly when he said, America is a really bad enemy to have, but they're a worse friend.
That was Nogo DM.
No, it wasn't him. He got shot.
No, it was. I read it in your thing, I believe. I did read your article. I thought it was DM who said that I could be wrong, of course.
No, President Thuy, he flew out to Taiwan with his plane load of gold. No, the point there is the Americans will actually do what is good for America, which is what they should do. Now, if we're not good friends for them, if we tell them they can go and get stuff and not try and tell us how to run our defense force, or we continue to actually behave the way we are, we continue to leave Kevin right as our ambassador. You know that Kevin cost me $10? I took a bet that Kevin would be sacked before the 31st, by the Americans, before the 31st of March. And tomorrow I have to find $10 to pay up. It looks like he's going to last that long. Unbelievable. Anyway, the answer is no, and we're not going to get any better friends than the Americans. People do what is best in their own interest. We thought Britain was going to protect us because we lost 60,000 dead in World War I. Great sacrifice. But when World War II came along and Britain was in its own trouble, who did they look after first? I mean, they did send out the Repulse and the Prince of Wales. They lost them, and they lost, I think, 40 or 50,000 soldiers in Singapore. So they did try, but they weren't then able to help us after that. And we got 7 million people. They only had at that stage about 36 million. So you're on your own, kids. And we thought, oh, okay, you really want us to fight for ourselves? My God, you can't be serious. And by the way, our military was better then, but it still wasn't very good because they actually lost the whole of the 8th Division. They lost 3 brigades. We set up a tripwire and said to the Japanese, if you come and take these 3 places, Rabaul, Ambon, and Timor, then we'll regard that as a warlike action and we'll go to war with you. So they came and took out all 3 and executed over 3,000 Australian soldiers, and then they captured Singapore and took the rest of the division. So much for the tripwire plan, which, by the way, one of the commanders there said, this is not going to work. I won't last a day here. He was wrong. He lasted 3 days. And I've written about each of those for Camaraderie magazine. Now, the point here is, what are we going to do this time that's different? And we never get right to that sort of strategy of how do we take on someone as big as them. And one of the things I said in that 54-page article I sent you is we need to get ourselves some good friends. We need to line ourselves up with people like the Indians who don't like the Chinese.
Agreed.
We can line ourselves up with the Vietnamese. We can line ourselves up with the Japanese, which we've done. And, there are people, and the Filipinos actually are the ones that are being urinated upon, to use a polite term, by the Chinese right now, who've actually driven them off second something shoal. They've been driven off that, which is in their territorial waters, 30 kilometers off the coast. And they came up, they surrounded it with ships, they turned on the water cannon, they injured a few sailors, and they chased them off this thing. And that's within 30 kilometers of the Filipino coast, and said that's ours. And it's something 1,200 kilometers from China.
I want to go back to India because I think that's very interesting. Obviously, they have a huge population as well. They border China. What are their military capabilities like?
Much better than they were when they lost the last war with the Chinese. And in fact, the Chinese attacked them because they're fighting over this sort of pass in the middle of the Kashmir area. And the Chinese come down one night and they killed about 20 or 30, including the lieutenant colonel who commanded it, a man of great respect, who'd been talking to them just that day. And they came down, they beat him to death with sticks with nails in the end of it, killed him like that, and threw his body in the river, so he was never found. Now that annoyed the rest of the battalion, which then went and killed somewhere between 100 and 200 Chinese. They just went straight through the camp there and just killed everyone they could get their hands on. And so the Chinese woke up to the fact that that wasn't such a good idea after all. And the Indians are very good at acclimatizing themselves to high altitudes, because these guys are fighting at 15,000 feet. And it takes you a long time to acclimatize to that. And the Chinese are not very good at it. And they're finding that the Chinese that they're sending up there are from the lowlands and just don't have the lung capacity ever to be able to actually survive for a long time. So they're rotating the soldiers every 3 months, whereas the Indians who go up there are actually staying there for 6 to 12 months and not suffering any side effects. So the Indians are very good in that where they're going to fight, they will actually be able to win. The other thing was, I don't know if I mentioned actually to you about Bhutan and Sikkim. The Chinese did the silent invasion. They took over 1/3 of Bhutan by simply moving in people who just sat down, built a house, and started farming. That's my front yard. No, it's not anymore. It's mine. And so they started taking over until they'd actually taken over 1/3 of Bhutan. About 3 months ago, a large number of Indian soldiers arrived and simply evicted them, pushed them back over the border, and said, no, this is Bhutan's territory, and we are protectors of Bhutan. And the Chinese did nothing. Now, the Chinese sank a couple of fishing boats. They drowned a couple of fishermen in the South China Sea by ramming them. And now what's happened this time is that there's an oil rig, which they claim is in their waters. By the way, it's about 20 kilometers off the coast up near Haiphong. And so they came up with nearly 60 ships, including some fairly powerful ships. So the Vietnamese Navy sailed in and confronted them and continued to resupply this one and continued to actually, protect. Their smaller ships were protecting against the larger ones. And the Chinese eventually withdrew. So they're bullies. And if you want to go and look it up, look up the Battle of Johnson Reef, where there's a memorial. I know where it is, but I haven't been to see it. About Johnsson, Johnson Reef, where I think it was either 64 or 84 Vietnamese sailors, unarmed, were standing there with a flag on a reef, and it was up to knee-depth water because the tide had come in, and they were saying, that's our reef. And they call it the Battle of Johnson Reef because they gave out medals for it, and the machine gun and killed all of them. Unarmed, standing there by themselves. There you go. Yeah, read that. Keep going down. And there's actually a video on it. And they sank a couple of ships at the same time. There should be a video of it down the bottom, but worth looking at, because that's what you're up against. People who are absolutely ruthless, but are bullies. And if you don't stand up to them now, it'll be the salami slicing that Hitler did. I'll take a bit of Sudetenland. I'll take Alsace-Lorraine. I'll take back Danzig. I'll take up, Czechoslovakia. And we'll go one step too far. And then you're in a world war. If you don't stop them early, you won't be able to stop them late. It will end up in an absolute world war. And I'll have a front seat view from my balcony, looking out over the South China Sea as the Chinese ships get sunk by the shore batteries of the Vietnamese army. Oh, good shot, sir.
All right. We're at the 2-hour mark, so let's finish off with a little bit of fun. You guys might be able to answer this separately or together. I don't know how you want to do this, but Alistair, let's kick it off with you. Give me your top 5 military leaders of all time.
Of all time? Oh, you got it. It's got to be Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Napoleon, although he lost in the end. I actually put Monash up there in the top 5, and probably either Grant or Sheridan. And by the way, I mean, he's not far off, but I would put down Yap in Vietnam. But he had one great success, which was Dien Bien Phu, but he had one great failure, which actually cost him his job. He was sort of sidelined after that, and that was trying to take over Vietnam in 1972. And it cost them a lot of lives and soldiers. So, yeah.
All right, Kevin, what's your...
Well, I'm with Alistair in terms of Alexander the Great. I'm surprised he didn't mention Hannibal and then work his way up to Caesar. But in the modern times, the people that I found to be most impressive were definitely Sir John Monash. I've read his biography. And also there's other people like Guderian and Manstein in the German area. Guderian was the one who codified the Blitzkrieg, and he took that from Liddell Hart, I believe, and Alistair could correct me on that.
He did.
Yeah, and interestingly, Liddell Hart was totally ignored by the British, and he had all of the clues as to how one could capitalize on modern technology to create a force which could move very rapidly and would break trench warfare. But yeah, Manstein also was exceptional. I suppose if you go back a little bit, what do you think of Bismarck? Because Bismarck actually sowed the seeds for things like staff officers. And he was the combination of not only an adroit military leader, but also a diplomat and politician. He was able to swim in all of those waters.
Yeah, no, I would have classified him as being the supreme politician who was able to bring together what became Germany. And I saw the numbers that there were over 500 principalities that made up Germany. 500.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, it's almost as bad as the number of generals we've got in the Australian Army now.
Yeah.
By the way, Kevin, for you, not Kevin, for Stephen, the number of generals we now have has doubled since 2013, and there's now 219 generals, which is one general for every 260 soldiers. Now, what this means, we've only got 6 battalions, so that we need 36, so we can take 36 brigadiers to be the commanders of a battalion now, and we've now got enough, that's lieutenant generals, we can make them commanders of the 6 battalions, then brigadiers can command a company, and then we get full colonels will be able to command platoons. And of course, we reduce the number of men in a platoon from 34 to, I think it's 27, is it now, Kevin?
Yes. Look, you've raised something else, and this is fantastical. But if you really want to fix up the Australian Defence Force, you would perform what's called MIRE, Management Initiated Early Retirement, for everybody above the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. You would then submit require all officers to take intelligence tests and psychometric tests. And what I'm aiming for, there are two types of personality. There's a personality that is a visionary, and they are appalling when it comes to attention to detail, for the very reason that their mind is always floating around into possibilities and what ifs. And then you have people who have their 3 R's: read, remember, and regurgitate, and not much happens in the grey matter in that process. But they are people who can come up with standing operating procedures, and they follow them perfectly. Now, if you can form a team made up of your commander being the person who is, you could say the thinker, and you have on exactly the same level, the 2IC gets paid the same amount of money as the IC, but the 2IC makes things happen, then you've got a really potent team. And that's what we somehow have to get. What we've got at the top of the Defence Force are people who are 3 Rs, read, remember, and regurgitate. They're extremely good at detail, at carrying out instructions and so forth, but they're hopeless when it comes to innovation, imagination, and taking risks.
What you're talking about is the visionary at the top and the missionary. The missionary is the guy who actually does it, but the visionary actually decides what needs to be done.
And I don't like it being at the top, Alistair. Because one should not take the view that the missionary is somehow inferior to the visionary. They're both absolutely vital.
But
I just had to inject that thought.
I already had that. But yeah, no, if you may remember, not a couple of years ago now, 50 senior officers across the Defence Force, I know there was a couple of Navy guys in there too, Admiral Barry put a full-page ad in the Australian, and it was signed by 52 officers, saying that they need to actually start taking into account climate change and all the battle plans. And I did write a comment on that, which was, well, we've just identified 50 new gardeners who want to spend more time with their families.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Let's. I just had a thought. Coming to my mind. I know it's only a month away, but what I'd like to do is bring you two back closer to Anzac Day, and maybe we can do an episode focused on Australian military history and some of the success that we've had, and maybe even some of the failures that we've had. But just recap our defence history here in Australia, more so for the younger generation, because I think we've always had a good military history in this country, and I think we need to focus on that with Anzac Day coming up. So if you guys are up for it, hopefully I can get you back in a few weeks' time, and we can do a whole episode again just on the history, more so than looking forward like we have done tonight. But thank you both for coming on.
Okay.
This has been fascinating. It went into a different direction that I thought it would, but that was fascinating in itself. And I really appreciate you both coming on and sharing some of your insights and knowledge. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Steve.
Can we start the next one before we get on to the history? And I write history all the time for 4 magazines. But what I want to do is actually look at just covering some of the things like the stealth bombers, the Navy we didn't cover at all, and a couple of things like there's something else I wanted to mention in that there's a company in Australia called Sea Transport, run by a Scotsman, of course, Stuart Ballantyne, who actually has designed a rear-loading amphibious craft. And it was studied by the Navy for 12 years and then rejected, and we went back to the 1943 unseaworthy design. And he's now had an order for 2 of them to be built and stationed in Darwin for the US Marines. And he's now on his way. He sent me an email just today saying he's on his way to Hawaii to discuss the building of 33 more for the US Marines. Now, not that they would know anything about amphibious warfare. I mean, we can teach them everything they need to know.
That is wonderful news, though, isn't it? I mean, that is just fabulous that we have somebody at last. I know it's not the ideal. We would have loved it if our Defence Force had picked it up. But you're right, Alistair. You don't get much more expert about, beach operations, marine operations than the US Marines. So you're absolutely right. Crossing that beach gap is what their expertise is. And it's. I feel very, very, happy for Stuart Ballantyne. Good on him, and good luck to those Australians involved in that.
Yeah.
And look, I've always loved when I was a kid growing up. I was always fascinated by the stealth bombers. What did you want to say about the stealth bombers, just to finish up? Because you were saying we don't need them. You were just saying we just need drones, missiles, and HIMARS.
We won't get stealth bombers. They're far too expensive. We can't pay $1 billion for a couple of bombers. So the Americans won't give them to us anyway. The B-1 still uses the 8086 chip, Kevin, do you even? No, you're not old enough
Yeah,
to
yeah.
remember.
Oh, yeah. 8086. It's a 16-bit assembler and register. So yeah, it was a true 16-bit chip, whereas the 8088 wasn't. It had an 8-bit bus.
Yeah,
and a 16-bit register. Yeah.
Yeah, the point about it was they wrote millions of lines of software based on this chip. So when they eventually got the plane and started flying, they thought, well, we really should upgrade this, and then found they couldn't. Because you'd have to take this chip out and rewrite millions of lines of software. So as it works, they just leave it. So they're using a chip from, what's that now, 40 years ago.
Yes.
It's now flying a B-1 bomber.
Yeah. In fact, it was 1988 that I used it in an Amstrad 512.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Let's finish up. So a lot of focus tonight was on government, as Kevin said. So please head to Australians for Better Government. Sign up, become a member. The more members we can attract, the stronger this movement will be. And we really need you to jump on board. And we've got some big plans. Pre-election and post-election, mainly post-election, because we're all going to be busy with the election coming up. But please jump on board. The more resources, members, everything will lead to a stronger movement. And also head to commandingthenarrative.com. A lot of events coming up, a lot of really good podcasts coming up as well. So hit the sign up button in the top right-hand corner. Get the weekly newsletter, and you can keep up to date with everything that we're doing. But for now, share this out. Get it out there to as many people as you can that might be interested, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Stephen.
Bye.